The execution failed before it began, and that was the first mistake the Empire made. The chamber had been designed for certainty, for endings that could not be questioned, for sentences that carried the full weight of 1,000 conquered systems. When the weapon rose from the floor, silent, precise, absolute, no one in the tribunal doubted what would happen next. They had done this before. They had erased entire bloodlines with less ceremony. The alien woman standing at the center of the chamber did not resist. She did not plead. She did not even look at the weapon. She was watching the ceiling. That was what unsettled them first. Final charge confirmed. The adjudicator announced, voice amplified across the vast hall. Violation of sovereign decree. Unauthorized union with a human entity. Sentence, termination. The word echoed, heavy and final. Still, she said nothing. Observers leaned forward in their seats, sensing something they could not name. There was no fear in her posture, no tremor in her breath, no instinctive recoil from the rising weapon that had ended kings and shattered rebellions. If anything, there was patience in her stillness, the kind that did not belong to someone waiting to die. The weapon aligned. Energy gathered. The execution command initiated. And the system stopped. Not slowed. Not glitched. Stopped. Across the chamber, every display flickered in unison, their carefully controlled data streams replaced by something else entirely. Lines of unknown code spread like fractures across the tribunal's network, rewriting access permissions faster than the system could reject them. The weapon lowered itself. No one had touched it. What is this? One of the commanders demanded, but the question had no direction, no target, because the system was no longer answering anyone. A single line appeared across every screen. Protected status engaged. Silence fell, not the controlled silence of authority, but the sudden, hollow absence of certainty. The adjudicator tried to override the system, hands moving faster now, precision giving way to urgency. Security, isolate the chamber. Lock down all external access. Trace the intrusion. No intrusion detected, came the reply, voice strained. There is no external signal. No breach point. That was when the woman smiled. It was small. Barely there. But it changed everything. Impossible, another officer whispered, scanning the system logs that refused to behave like logs anymore. This code, it's not entering the system. It's already here. Already here. The phrase spread through the chamber like a contagion. How long? Someone asked. No one answered. Because no one could. The woman finally lowered her gaze from the ceiling and looked at them, really looked this time, as though assessing something that had already failed. You should have asked a different question, she said softly. The adjudicator froze. What question? Her eyes flickered briefly toward the main display, where the words protected status engaged pulsed once, then stabilized as if settling into place. Not what is happening, she replied, her voice calm in a way that made the room feel smaller. But when it started. A pause stretched. Then one of the technicians, pale now, whispered the only thing that mattered. There's a timestamp. All eyes snapped to the screen. The code had a marker. A start point. Not seconds ago. Not minutes ago. 3 years earlier. The chamber didn't erupt into panic. It collapsed into something worse. Understanding. And somewhere beyond the reach of their sensors, beyond their borders, beyond even the range of their fear, something had already begun moving. The woman closed her eyes briefly as if feeling it. Not hoping. Not wondering. Knowing. And for the first time since the sentence had been spoken, the Empire realized the execution had never been theirs to control. The tribunal did not adjourn. Empires did not pause for confusion, and they did not yield authority simply because their systems had begun behaving in ways they did not understand. Orders were issued, redundancies activated, secondary command lines opened and closed in rapid succession as the chamber attempted to reassert control over a reality that had quietly slipped beyond its reach. It did not work. Every override request returned the same response, not as an error, but as a completed action that had already been accounted for, already evaluated, already denied. The system was not resisting them. It was accommodating them within a framework they had never been given access to. The difference was subtle. The implication was not. Shut it down, the adjudicator ordered, abandoning protocol for the first time in decades. Entire network. Full reset. That would disable life support in 6 adjacent sectors. A technician responded immediately, his voice tighter now, less certain. And even if we proceed, the core permissions layer is not responding to shutdown authority. Not responding, the adjudicator repeated, as if the phrase itself were offensive. Or refusing? The technician hesitated. Neither, he said finally. It's operating independently. The chamber absorbed that. Operating independently. The Empire's most secure system, built on conquest, layered with generations of encryption, isolated from external networks by design, was no longer under their command. And it had been that way for 3 years. Across the chamber floor, the woman stood exactly where they had left her, hands relaxed at her sides, expression composed, as though the unfolding crisis had already reached its conclusion in her mind and the rest of them were simply catching up. You implanted this, one of the commanders said, stepping forward now, accusation cutting through the uncertainty like a blade searching for something solid to strike. During your transit. Some form of embedded trigger. You've been waiting for this moment. She turned her head slightly, studying him with quiet interest, as though he had offered a theory she found almost worth considering. No, she said. The simplicity of it unsettled him more than denial would have. Then explain it. I already did, she replied. The commander's jaw tightened. You said it started 3 years ago. You expect us to believe you had access to imperial systems that far in advance. I expect you to believe, she said gently, that you were never the only ones building systems. The words landed differently this time. Not as defiance. As correction. A murmur spread through the upper tiers of the tribunal, diplomats and observers exchanging glances that carried the faint, growing weight of something far more dangerous than a security breach. Implication. Human architecture, someone whispered, not loudly, but loud enough. That word, human, shifted the room. Until now, it had been a classification, a minor variable in a larger equation. A species catalogued, studied, occasionally tolerated, occasionally contained. They were not unknown, but they were not fully understood. And that gap, that quiet space between knowledge and assumption, had just widened into something immeasurable. Bring up her file, the adjudicator said, voice steadier now, controlled again, clinging to process like structure might still matter. The display shifted. Her identity unfolded in layers of bureaucratic precision, lineage, affiliations, travel records, diplomatic status markers, all exactly as expected, all exactly as they had been reviewed before her detention. Nothing new. Nothing threatening. Nothing that explained any of this. Marital bond confirmed, the system added at the bottom of the record, the words appearing without being requested. The chamber stilled. That field had not been there before. Cross-reference, the adjudicator ordered. The system complied instantly. A second file opened. Then a third. Then the screen went black. Not an error. Not a failure. A denial. Access restricted. Authorization level, non-existent. The adjudicator felt something cold settle beneath his control. Override, he said. The system did not respond. It simply replaced the black screen with a single line of text. Request acknowledged. Then nothing. The woman exhaled softly, almost inaudibly, but in the silence it carried. He received it, she said. No one asked to. No one needed to. Across the chamber, sensors began reporting anomalies at the edge of Imperial space. Not intrusions. Not violations. Just absences. Patrol routes that should have been occupied registering empty. Communication relays failing to confirm signals that had always been there. Gaps. Small at first. Then widening. Locate the source, a commander snapped, turning toward the tactical displays as they struggled to render something that refused to be mapped. There is no source, came the reply, strained now, bordering on disbelief. No ship, no fleet, no identifiable signal. It's as if. The technician stopped. As if what? The adjudicator demanded. He swallowed. As if something is moving through our space without interacting with it. The words did not make sense. They did not fit any known model of travel, of physics, of presence. And yet the data insisted. The woman closed her eyes for a brief moment, her expression softening in a way that did not belong in a chamber designed for execution. "Good," she murmured. The adjudicator turned back to her sharply. "What did you just say?" She opened her eyes again, meeting his gaze with a calm that felt, now, like the center of everything unraveling around them. "I was worried," she said, "that he might be delayed." A beat passed. Then another. Outside the tribunal walls, beyond the reach of their defenses, something continued moving closer. Not faster. Not slower. Exactly on time. And for the first time, the Empire began to understand that whatever they had triggered was not arriving in response to them. It was arriving because it had always intended to. The Empire did what empires always did when confronted with something they could not immediately dominate. They searched for history. Because history, properly catalogued, properly interpreted, was supposed to turn uncertainty into pattern, and pattern into control. This anomaly, this intrusion without entry, this system without origin, had ever existed before, then somewhere in the archives there would be a record. A precedent. A weakness. They did not find one. What they found instead were absences. "Expand the search," the adjudicator ordered, his voice steady, though the rhythm beneath it had changed. "Remove classification filters. Include pre-unification records, wartime archives, coalition data, everything." The command rippled outward through the Empire's data networks, unlocking layers that had not been accessed in centuries, pulling fragments of forgotten conflicts and buried alliances into the present. At first, nothing aligned. Then a pattern began to form, not from what was present, but from what was missing. Every time the search parameters intersected with certain human engagements, the records thinned. Not erased entirely, but incomplete. Summaries without details. Conclusions without sequences. Reports that referred to outcomes no one had bothered to explain. "That's not possible," one of the archivists said, scrolling through a file that ended mid-sentence. "These aren't redactions. Redactions leave structure. This is absence." "Focus," the adjudicator snapped. "Find the common variable." The archivist hesitated, then highlighted a cluster of files that shared the same quiet irregularity. "Here," he said. 14 separate conflicts across 12 systems. Different species, different theaters, different outcomes. But every one of them intersects with a human designation we can't fully access. The display expanded, attempting to render the classification. It resolved into a name, or part of one. The rest of it refused to appear. The system did not glitch. It simply declined. The silence that followed carried a different weight than before. Not confusion. Recognition. "Is that a designation?" one of the commanders asked, his voice lower now, cautious in a way that had not been present earlier. "Or a title?" "No context," the archivist replied. "No origin. Just references. And every reference ends the same way." He brought up a fragment from one of the records, a survivor's report from a conflict that had officially ended with unexplained strategic collapse. The text was brief. It should not have mattered. It did. "We didn't see him enter. We didn't see him leave. We only realized he had been there when the system started choosing him over us." The chamber held that sentence in silence. Choosing him. Not obeying. Not being overridden. Choosing. "That's not how systems work," the adjudicator said, but the statement lacked conviction now, more an assertion of how things should be than how they were. Across the chamber floor, the woman shifted her weight slightly, the smallest adjustment, but enough to draw attention back to her. "You keep assuming," she said softly, "that your systems are the only ones that matter." The adjudicator turned toward her, irritation sharpening into something more focused, more dangerous. "And you keep implying that this human, your husband, is responsible for something you cannot explain." "I'm not implying anything," she replied. Her gaze flickered briefly toward the darkened section of the display where the incomplete names still lingered, as if waiting for permission it would never receive. "I'm telling you," she continued, "that you're asking the wrong question." The same phrase. This time, it landed harder. "What question?" the adjudicator demanded. She held his gaze for a moment, long enough that the chamber seemed to narrow around the exchange. Then she said, "You keep asking who he is." The pause. "You should be asking," she added quietly, "what he built." Before anyone could respond, the tactical displays shifted again, interrupting the moment with a cascade of new data. "Outer sector anomaly expanding," a technician reported, his voice tighter now, urgency breaking through the controlled cadence. "We're losing track of patrol routes in sequence. Not random, sequential." "Define sequential," the adjudicator said. The display zoomed outward, mapping Imperial space in layers of light and data. A line appeared. Not drawn. Inferred. A path of absence, stretching from the outer edge of their territory toward the tribunal world, each point along it marked by the same phenomenon. Systems still intact, structures undamaged, but awareness bypassed. Ships that should have detected movement reported nothing. Sensors that should have registered anomalies recorded silence. It was not destruction. It was omission. "As if he's not interacting with anything," the technician said, echoing the earlier observation, but now with context that made it worse. "He's not disabling systems. He's moving through them without being recognized by them at all." "That's impossible," a commander insisted. The technician didn't argue. He just expanded the timeline. The line grew longer. Closer. "He's already inside our inner defense grid," the technician whispered. The words should have triggered alarms, lockdowns, immediate escalation. Instead, the system simply updated. Protected status maintained. The woman's eyes softened again, not with relief, but with something quieter, deeper. Familiarity. "He doesn't like unnecessary damage," she said, almost to herself. The adjudicator felt something shift in his understanding, not a collapse, not yet, but a reconfiguration of assumptions that no longer held. "You're saying," he began carefully, "that this human has breached our entire defensive perimeter without triggering a single active response, and has chosen not to engage." "I'm saying," she replied, meeting his gaze again, "that he hasn't needed to." A silence followed that felt heavier than any alarm could have. Then, from somewhere deep within the tribunal's infrastructure, a new alert surfaced, not from the outer sectors, not from the defense grid, but from the heart of the system itself. A location marker. Internal. Moving. The technician stared at it, his hands hovering above the controls as if touching them might make it real. "That's not possible," he said again, but now the words sounded different, stripped of denial, reduced to observation. The marker advanced. One level. Then another. Not fast. Not slow. Deliberate. "Where is it?" the adjudicator asked. The technician swallowed. "Lower infrastructure," he said. "Sublevel access corridors." "He's not approaching from above." The pause. "He's coming up." The chamber did not erupt. It held. Because for the first time since the execution had failed, the Empire understood something with absolute clarity. This was not an invasion. There was no fleet. No bombardment. No war. Just a single point moving through everything they had built, as if it had been designed with him in mind. And somewhere between one breath and the next, the marker crossed another threshold. Closer. Still unseen. Still untouched. Still unstoppable. The woman tilted her head slightly, listening to something no one else could hear. Then she spoke almost gently. "He's early." And for reasons no one in the chamber could explain, that was the most terrifying part. The Emperor entered the chamber without announcement, and the room changed around him. Not because of his presence alone, but because of what his arrival meant. The tribunal had already lost control of the situation, but authorities still needed a center, something that could impose structure on what was unfolding. The Emperor was that structure, or at least the last remaining illusion of it. He did not sit. His gaze moved once across the chamber, taking in the halted execution system, the frozen displays, the silent weapon that should have ended everything minutes ago. Then his eyes settled on the woman. "You allowed this," he said, not as a question, but as a conclusion. She met his gaze without hesitation. "No," she replied calmly. "You revealed it." A faint tightening passed through the Emperor's expression, not anger, but recalibration. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the central display where the internal marker continued its steady ascent through the station's lower levels. "Explain that," he ordered. The technicians complied, projecting the path in full. The line of movement cut upward through sealed infrastructure, bypassing bulkheads, security gates, restricted zones that required layered authorization just to approach. Each barrier remained intact. Each system reported full functionality. Nothing had been broken. Nothing had been forced. And yet something had passed through all of it. The Emperor watched in silence as the marker advanced another level. Then he said, "Lock every access point between that position and this chamber." "It's already done," the adjudicator replied carefully. "Every route is sealed." The Emperor's gaze did not leave the display. "Then explain how it continues to move." No one answered. Because there was no answer that fit within the rules they understood. Across the chamber, the woman shifted her stance slightly, the smallest movement, but enough to draw the Emperor's attention back to her. "You're still thinking in terms of barriers," she said. He studied her for a long moment. "And you're suggesting those barriers are irrelevant." "I'm suggesting," she replied, "that they were never designed to stop him." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Everything we build is designed to stop something." "Not everything," she said quietly. A pause stretched between them, heavy with implications that neither side was willing to fully articulate. Then the Emperor turned back to the display. "Deploy internal defense units," he ordered. "All levels. I want eyes on that position." The command executed instantly. Across the lower infrastructure, surveillance feeds activated, pulling in visual data from corridors that had not been accessed in years. War drones disengaged from their charging stations, silent and efficient as they moved to intercept the unknown presence. The first feed came online. An empty corridor. The second. Another. The third. A figure. For less than a second. Then gone. "Pause that," the Emperor said sharply. The feed rewound, frame by frame, until the image stabilized. At the edge of the frame. A man. Still indistinct, as though the system itself was struggling to render him clearly. "Enhance," the Emperor ordered. The system tried. The image did not sharpen. It resisted definition, not through distortion, but through absence, as if certain details simply refused to exist within the system's capacity to display them. "He's there," a technician whispered, leaning closer. "The system just can't hold him." The Emperor said nothing. The feed advanced. The drones reached the corridor seconds later, weapons primed, sensors sweeping the space with mechanical precision. They found nothing. "Continue tracking," the Emperor ordered. The feeds updated again. Another corridor. Another glimpse. Closer now. Each time the system caught him, it lost him again, like trying to hold on to something that did not agree to be observed. Across the chamber, tension tightened into something sharper, more focused. This was no longer abstract. No longer theoretical. He was inside. And they still could not engage him. "Redirect all internal weapons to that sector," a commander said, pushing forward now, urgency overriding caution. "Flood the corridor. Contain the movement pattern." The Emperor considered it for a fraction of a second. "Do it." The command executed. Energy arrays shifted deep within the station's structure, weapons designed to neutralize entire platoons aligning along the projected path of the intruder. Power surged, systems locking onto coordinates that had already proven unreliable. The corridor lit up. Nothing happened. No discharge. No impact. The weapons remained active, fully charged, fully functional. And completely still. "Why aren't they firing?" the commander demanded. "They are," the technician replied, his voice strained now. "The system is executing the command. It's just not affecting him." The Emperor's gaze hardened. "That is not an explanation. It's the only one we have." The display shifted again, pulling back from the corridor feeds to the central system overlay. The path was still there. Unbroken. uninterrupted. The weapons had not altered it, had not even touched it. Across the chamber, the woman exhaled softly, something almost like relief passing through her expression. "You're escalating," she said gently, without understanding what you're escalating against. The Emperor turned to her fully now, the weight of his attention settling like gravity. "Then help me understand," he said. She held his gaze. And for the first time since the execution had failed, there was something different in her eyes. Not patience. Not calm. Something deeper. Something that felt like a warning. "You're not under attack," she said quietly. The Emperor's expression did not change, but something in the room shifted again, subtle and profound. "Then what is this?" he asked. The marker advanced. One more level. Closer. Closer than it had any right to be. The woman's voice remained steady. "This," she said, "is retrieval." The words settled into the chamber with a weight no one could ignore. Not invasion. Not war. Retrieval. As if everything they had built, every defense, every system, every assumption, was not being challenged, but bypassed, because it had never been relevant. The Emperor looked back at the display as the marker crossed into the final sublevel beneath the tribunal chamber. For the first time, something unfamiliar pressed against the edges of his control. Not fear. Not yet. But the recognition of it. "What happens," he asked slowly, "when it gets here?" The woman tilted her head slightly, listening again to something none of them could perceive. Then she answered. "He stops waiting." The marker moved again. And the chamber realized, all at once, that whatever had been patient until now was about to change. The chamber doors did not open. They were not breached, not forced, not overridden in any way that the system could register as intrusion. They simply disengaged, as though the command to remain closed had quietly expired. No alarm sounded. No resistance triggered. The doors slid apart with the same smooth, obedient motion they had used thousands of times before. And he stepped through. For a moment, no one spoke. Not because they were afraid, though that was beginning to take shape, but because the reality of what they were seeing did not match any expectation they had prepared for. He was not armored. Not augmented in any visible way. No weapons drawn. No field distortion. No sign of the force that had carried him through an entire empire's defenses without consequence. He looked ordinary. That was the second mistake they made. Because ordinary did not walk into the center of absolute authority and remain unchallenged. And yet he did. His presence settled into the chamber not like an intrusion, but like something that had always belonged there and was only now being acknowledged. The system did not react to him. It adjusted around him, subtle shifts in processing, minor recalibrations that no one would have noticed if they had not been watching so closely. He did not look at the Emperor. He did not look at the guards, or the weapons, or the frozen execution systems still standing uselessly behind the woman. He looked at her. And everything else became secondary. "Ariana," he said, his voice even, unhurried, carrying no strain despite the impossibility of his arrival. The name settled into the chamber like a key turning in a lock no one else could see. The woman, Ariana, took a single step forward. For the first time since her capture, her composure shifted, not into fear, but into something warmer, something that had been held back with deliberate care. "You're early," she said softly. A faint curve touched his expression, something almost like amusement. "You sounded concerned," he replied. The exchange was brief. Contained. And yet it carried more weight than anything that had happened before it. The Emperor moved then, reclaiming the moment by force of will alone. "Stop," he commanded, his voice cutting through the silence with the authority of 1,000 systems behind it. The guards reacted instantly, weapons rising, targeting locks snapping into place with mechanical precision. The man did not turn. He did not acknowledge them. He simply stepped closer to Ariana. Close enough now that the distance between them no longer belonged to the Empire. "Do not take another step," the Emperor continued, sharper now. "You have breached sovereign space, bypassed imperial defenses, and interfered with tribunal authority. You will stand where you are and submit to containment." The pause. Then slowly the man turned his head. Not fully. Just enough. His eyes met the Emperor's. And in that moment, something subtle shifted again. Not in the room, not in the systems, but in the understanding of everyone present. Because the look he gave was not defiant. It was not aggressive. It was patient. As if he had already accounted for this part. "I'm not here for you," he said. The words were simple. But they landed with a finality that stripped the Emperor's command of its weight. "You're here because of us," the Emperor replied, forcing the narrative back into his control. "You think this is retrieval? You think you walk in, take what you want, and leave?" The man's gaze returned to Ariana. "I don't take," he said quietly. Ariana's eyes flickered, something passing between them that no system could record, no observer could fully interpret. "I return," he added. The Emperor's expression hardened. "Seize him." The command triggered instantly. Weapons fired. Energy surged across the chamber in a coordinated strike designed to overwhelm, to neutralize, to erase. It did not reach him. Not because he blocked it. Not because he deflected it. The energy simply redirected. Not outward. Not back at the attackers. Away. As if the system itself had chosen a different outcome. The beams struck the walls, the floor, dissipating harmlessly into containment fields that had not been activated by any known command. The guards froze. The Emperor did not. "What are you?" he demanded, the question tearing free of control now, stripped of its composure. The man did not answer. Instead, he reached out. Not toward the Emperor. Not toward the guards. Toward Ariana. His hand stopped just short of hers. Not touching. Waiting. A choice. Ariana looked at his hand. Then back at his face. For a fraction of a second, the chamber held its breath. Then she placed her hand in his. And the world changed. The lights dimmed, not as a failure, but as a recalibration. The displays shifted, abandoning their previous data streams in favor of something deeper, older, something that had been buried beneath layers of imperial architecture for longer than anyone in the chamber had been alive. The floor beneath them vibrated, not violently, but with a low, resonant frequency that felt less like movement and more like awakening. "What did you do?" the Emperor demanded, stepping forward now despite himself. Ariana did not look at him. She was watching the system. "No," she said softly. "What did you?" The central display fractured, splitting into multiple layers of information that overlapped and reconfigured faster than the eye could follow. A new designation appeared. Not imperial. Not recent. Ancient. Human Defense Protocol. Bond Priority. The chamber fell into silence. "Impossible," one of the commanders whispered. "That system doesn't exist." "It does," Ariana replied. Her voice was no longer just calm. It carried something else now. Authority. "It was just never meant for you." The Emperor's gaze snapped back to the display as new data flooded in, revealing structures beneath the tribunal world that had never been mapped, never been recorded, never been acknowledged. Buried systems. Dormant constructs. An entire layer of infrastructure that predated the Empire itself. And it was responding. Not to the man. To her. The realization hit the chamber all at once. "You're not the trigger," the Emperor said slowly, his voice tightening as understanding sharpened into something far more dangerous. He looked at the man. Then at Ariana. "You're the key." Ariana did not deny it. The man's grip on her hand tightened slightly, grounding, steady. Across the chamber, the ancient system continued to wake, its presence expanding through the network, rewriting priorities, reassigning authority, shifting control away from the empire that had claimed it for centuries without ever knowing what lay beneath. "This world," Ariana said quietly, her gaze still fixed on the unfolding system, "was never yours." The Emperor took a step forward, the last remnants of his composure cracking under the weight of what he was seeing. "Shut it down," he ordered, though the command sounded hollow now, directed at systems that no longer recognized him. No response came. Only the steady expansion of something older, deeper, and far more deliberate than anything the Empire had built. The man finally looked back at the Emperor. "This is why you shouldn't have taken her," he said. Not as a threat. As a statement. And somewhere deep beneath the tribunal, something massive shifted into full awareness. Not because it had been activated, but because it had been called. And for the first time since the execution failed, the Empire understood the truth they had been avoiding. This was never about stopping him. It was about what would happen when she decided to answer. The planet did not shake. That was what made it worse. There was no catastrophic rupture, no violent eruption of power that could be measured, categorized, or resisted. The world beneath the tribunal simply adjusted, as though something long dormant had awakened and found everything exactly where it expected it to be. The lights dimmed further, not fading into darkness, but settling into a new equilibrium. Displays across the chamber reorganized themselves, imperial data streams dissolving into layered constructs of unfamiliar architecture, each line of code carrying a structure that did not belong to anything the Empire had built. The Emperor watched it happen in silence. For the first time in his reign, he had no command to give that would matter. "What is it doing?" one of the commanders asked, his voice barely contained, as though raising it too much might draw the system's attention. No one answered, because the system was already answering for itself. Across the chamber, a new layer of information surfaced, not requested, not triggered, simply revealed. Population grids. Infrastructure layouts. Energy distribution networks. Not imperial. Human. Every city, every transport corridor, every defense node, mapped, categorized, understood with a level of precision that could only have come from something that had been watching for a very long time. "This is a surveillance system," the adjudicator said, but even as he spoke, he knew the word was insufficient. "No," Ariana replied quietly. Her hand remained in Logan's, her presence steady, but something about her had changed. The calm was still there, but beneath it was a sense of alignment, as though she had stepped into something that fit her perfectly. "It's a safeguard." The Emperor's gaze snapped to her. "Safeguard for what?" The pause. Then simply, "For us." The implication landed harder than any weapon could have. Before the Emperor could respond, the system shifted again. External feeds came online. Orbit. The Imperial fleets, hundreds of vessels, layered in defensive formations around the tribunal world, hung motionless against the black. Not drifting. Not damaged. Still. "Status," a commander demanded, already knowing the answer would not satisfy. "Full systems operational," the technician replied, his voice strained. "Weapons charged, shields active, propulsion responsive." "Then why aren't they moving?" "They are trying to." The words settled into the chamber like a fracture. "They're receiving commands," the technician continued, fingers moving rapidly across controls that no longer obeyed him. "They're executing them. But the system is prioritizing something else." The display updated. Every ship, every weapon platform, every defensive installation. Reassigned. Targeting parameters shifted. Not toward an enemy. Away from something. Away from the surface. Away from the chamber. A buffer. A boundary. "No," the Emperor said, stepping forward now, something sharper breaking through his control. "No, that is not acceptable. Reassert command authority. Override all external systems." The system acknowledged the command, then ignored it. A new message appeared across the display. "Bond priority active, non-combatant preservation enforced." The chamber went silent. The Emperor stared at the words, his understanding catching up to something he did not want to accept. "You're not attacking us," he said slowly, turning back to Ariana and Logan. Logan met his gaze without expression. "No," he said. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Then what is this?" Ariana answered. "You tried to make this a battlefield," she said. "It isn't." Her voice was steady, but it carried weight now, not just of certainty, but of control. "This system doesn't escalate violence," she continued. "It contains it." As if to confirm her words, the displays shifted again. Across the planet, military installations powered down, not fully, not destructively, but selectively. Targeting systems disengaged. Weapons safeties locked. Energy outputs rerouted into civilian grids. Cities that had been bracing for conflict found their power stabilizing instead. Transport networks resumed function. Civilian communications came online, broadcasting a single message across every channel. Stand clear. Protected zone established. What have you done? The Emperor demanded, his voice tightening as the reality of it closed in. Ariana finally looked at him fully. Her expression was not cruel, not triumphant. It was disappointed. We're making sure, she said, that when this ends, it doesn't cost anyone who isn't responsible. The Emperor felt something unfamiliar press against his composure. Not fear. Not yet. But the recognition that he had lost something fundamental. Control. You think you can just walk in here, he said, forcing his voice steady, forcing the weight of his authority back into place, reconfigure our systems, dictate our defenses, and then leave? Logan's grip on Ariana's hand tightened slightly, grounding, steady. We're not dictating anything, he said. The Emperor's gaze sharpened. Then what is this? Logan held his eyes. This, he said quietly, is the system doing what it was built to do. The Emperor's expression flickered, just for a moment. And what was it built to do? He asked. Ariana answered. To protect what matters, she said. A silence followed. Then, slowly, the Emperor began to understand the shape of it. Not a weapon. Not an invasion. A rule. A priority so deeply embedded that it could not be overridden by anything the Empire had built on top of it. And that, unknowingly, had triggered it. You're forcing us into a corner, one of the commanders said, stepping forward now, desperation beginning to edge into his voice. You've disabled our fleets, locked our weapons, cut off our ability to respond. You're leaving us with no options. Logan looked at him. No, he said. You still have one. The commander hesitated. What? Ariana's gaze shifted between them, something quieter settling back into her expression. Stop, she said. The simplicity of it cut deeper than any threat. The commander's jaw tightened. And if we don't? The room held. Because that was the question. Not of power. Not of capability. Of choice. Ariana did not answer immediately. Instead, she glanced briefly at Logan, something unspoken passing between them. Then she looked back at the commander. Then this system, she said carefully, will continue to prioritize what it was built for. The commander frowned. Which is? Ariana's expression did not change. Us. The word echoed. Not loudly, but with finality. And in that moment, the Empire realized something they had not considered until now. This system was not holding back because it was weak. It was holding back because it had chosen to. And choices could change. Deep beneath the chamber, the ancient network expanded further, reaching into layers of infrastructure that had never been mapped, never been understood. Something vast. Something patient. Something that had been waiting not for activation, but for permission. The Emperor felt it then, not through sensors, not through displays, but through the subtle shift in everything around him. The sense that the situation had not yet reached its limit. That there was still another threshold. Another line. One that had not yet been crossed. What happens? He asked slowly, his voice quieter now, more measured, if we don't stop? Ariana held his gaze. And for the first time, there was no softness in her answer. Then it stops waiting, she said. The pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, the system around them shifted again. As if listening. The Emperor did not hesitate. That was the difference between rulers who survived and those who became footnotes in someone else's history. When the moment came, when uncertainty collapsed into a single irreversible choice, hesitation meant surrender. He chose control. Authorize Directive Black, he said. The chamber froze. Even the commanders who had been pressing for escalation faltered at the words, because Directive Black was not strategy. It was desperation codified into protocol, a contingency written for scenarios where survival required abandoning every other consideration. Your Majesty, the adjudicator began carefully, that directive overrides all civilian protections. I am aware of what it does, the Emperor cut in, his voice sharp, final. Execute it. For a fraction of a second, the system did nothing. Then it acknowledged. Not as obedience. As recognition. Across the displays, the ancient human framework did not vanish, did not resist, did not even attempt to block the command. It simply shifted, making space, allowing the Empire to act. That was the third mistake. External fleet authority restored, a technician said, disbelief threading through his voice as control flooded back into systems that had been unreachable moments before. Weapons unlocking. Targeting parameters re-engaging. The commanders moved instantly, orders cascading outward, ships in orbit snapping back into motion as propulsion systems roared to life. For the first time since the execution failed, the Empire felt power return. And they used it. Primary strike authorized. A commander announced, eyes locked on the targeting grid. Firing solution aligned on tribunal surface. Containment zone designated. The implication was clear. If the system would not release control, they would burn it out. Along with everything it protected. Do it, the Emperor said. In orbit, the fleet fired. The strike descended like judgment, a convergence of energy designed to erase everything within the designated zone. It never reached the surface. Halfway through descent, the beams fractured. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Rewritten. The energy split apart, unraveling into harmless light that scattered across the sky in a silent, impossible display. The chamber stared. What? The commander started, then stopped as the targeting systems updated in real time. The strike had not failed. It had been redirected into non-existence. Secondary strike. The Emperor ordered, faster now, pushing harder. Full output. The fleet complied. Again. And again. Each time, the result was the same. Power unleashed. Power nullified. As if the very concept of harm had been removed from the equation. This is not possible, the adjudicator said, his voice no longer steady, no longer controlled. We are executing the commands. The system is allowing it. There is nothing intercepting the strike. Ariana watched the displays in silence. Then she spoke, her voice quieter than before, but carrying further. You were given your choice. The Emperor turned on her, something sharper breaking through now, something closer to anger. You've crippled an empire and you speak of choice? He demanded. You've taken our systems, our fleets, our authority, and you expect us to simply accept it? Logan shifted slightly beside her, his presence unchanged, but the weight of it different now. You still don't understand? He said. The Emperor's gaze snapped to him. Then explain it. Logan held his eyes. We didn't take anything, he said. You handed it over. The words landed harder than any strike. Before the Emperor could respond, a new alert surfaced, different from the others, deeper, older, carrying a resonance that cut through every layer of the chamber's systems. It did not come from the fleet. It did not come from the planet. It came from beneath. Subterranean network fully active, a technician whispered, his hands frozen above the controls as data flooded in faster than he could process it. Energy levels increasing. The displays shifted again. The ancient system expanded beyond the chamber, beyond the city, beyond the planet itself, reaching outward through space along pathways that had never been mapped, never been seen. Connections. Hidden. Waiting. What is that? A commander demanded. No one answered. Because the answer was already forming. Across the galaxy, dormant structures began to wake. Old stations flickered to life. Forgotten satellites adjusted their orbits. Silent constructs buried in asteroid fields and dead worlds activated in perfect sequence. A network. Not local. Not planetary. Galactic. The Emperor felt it then, the true scale of what they had triggered. This isn't a defense system, he said slowly, the realization cutting through everything else. Ariana looked at him. No, she agreed. It's a failsafe. The words settled into the chamber like a final verdict. The failsafe for what? The question lingered for less than a second. Then the answer began to reveal itself. Every system connected to the network updated simultaneously. A single directive propagated outward, overriding local commands, rewriting priorities across every node it touched. Bond priority escalation initiated. The chamber went still. Logan's expression did not change. Ariana's did. For the first time since he had arrived, there was something like tension in her posture, a subtle shift that did not escape notice. Logan, she said quietly. He looked at her. A question passed between them. Unspoken. Immediate. Then, without warning, the Emperor made his final move. Target her, he ordered. The command cut through the chamber, sharp, desperate, absolute. The guards hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then they obeyed. Weapons rose. Not at Logan. At Ariana. If the system responded to her, if she was the key. Remove the key. The logic was brutal. Simple. Wrong. The moment stretched. Logan moved. Not fast. Not in a way that could be tracked or measured. He was simply there. Between them. Between the weapons and Ariana. The strike fired. At point-blank range. The impact landed. For the first time, something changed. The energy did not vanish. It connected. Logan absorbed it, the force slamming into him with enough power to tear through reinforced armor, to vaporize organic matter, to end anything it touched. He did not fall. But he did not remain unchanged. The chamber saw it. A fracture. Not physical. Something deeper. Something that had held steady until now. His presence, his alignment with the system, the quiet certainty that had surrounded him since his arrival, shifted. Ariana's breath caught. Stop, she said, the word sharper than anything she had spoken before. The guards froze. Too late. Logan exhaled slowly, the movement controlled, deliberate, but carrying strain now, the first sign that he was not untouchable. You shouldn't have done that, he said. Not to the guards. Not even to the Emperor. To the system. And the system answered. The lights did not dim this time. They dropped. Every illumination in the chamber cut out simultaneously, plunging the space into a darkness so complete it felt like the absence of reality itself. Something else turned on. Not light. Not exactly. A presence. Every display came alive at once, not with data, not with code, but with a single, unified signal that pulsed through the chamber with a weight that pressed against every mind, every sensor, every assumption of control. Threat to protected entity confirmed. The words burned across every surface. Every system. Every level of the network. Ariana stepped forward, her hand tightening in Logan's, her expression no longer calm, no longer patient. Something older than her composure had surfaced. Something that did not negotiate. Logan, she said again, softer now, but carrying urgency. He looked at her. The fracture in him settling, stabilizing. But the system was no longer waiting. Across the galaxy, the network shifted into a new state, its priorities recalibrating in real time, its scope expanding beyond containment, beyond protection. Into something else. The Emperor felt it. For the first time, fully. Not as pressure. Not as fear. As inevitability. What happens now? He asked, his voice quieter than it had been since he entered the chamber. Ariana met his gaze. And this time, there was no warning left in her expression. Only truth. You crossed the line, she said. The pause. It responds. And somewhere beyond the chamber, beyond the planet, beyond the Empire itself, the system began to act. The galaxy did not burn. That was what the Emperor expected when the system responded, some overwhelming cascade of destruction that would justify every fear, every escalation, every desperate command he had given. Empires understood annihilation. They understood force. They understood endings that came in fire. This was not that. The response was precise. Across the tribunal chamber, the signal expanded, no longer contained to displays or systems but permeating the structure itself, threading through every layer of technology the Empire had built and quietly rewriting its priorities. Not destroying. Correcting. The Emperor watched as control dissolved from his grasp, not ripped away, not violently seized, but reassigned, as though the authority he had wielded for so long had been provisional all along, subject to a rule he had never known existed. What is it doing? He asked, though the answer was already forming. No one replied. Because the system was showing them. External feeds flooded the displays. Across the Empire, military fleets did not fire again. They powered down. Weapons systems disengaged. Command hierarchies collapsed into silence as ships that had once responded instantly to imperial orders now waited for something else. Not confusion. Instruction. On the surface, cities did not fall into chaos. They stabilized. Civilian channels overrode military broadcasts, projecting a single, unified message in every language the Empire had catalogued. No hostility required. Protection in effect. The words spread beyond the tribunal world, carried through the newly awakened network, reaching systems that had not communicated in centuries, linking them into a structure that had never been visible until now. A structure that did not belong to the Empire. The Emperor felt it fully then. Not power. Not resistance. Replacement. This isn't containment, he said, the realization stripping the last remnants of certainty from his voice. It's restructuring. Ariana stepped forward, her hands still in Logan's, her presence now fully aligned with the system that moved through everything around them. Yes, she said. The simplicity of it landed harder than any denial could have. You built something that could end us, the Emperor said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. Ariana shook her head slightly. No, she replied. We built something that could stop you. The distinction settled into the chamber with quiet finality. Logan stood beside her, the fracture from the strike still present but stabilized, held in place by something deeper than resilience, something that had nothing to do with physical endurance and everything to do with intent. You had your chance, he said, his voice calm again, but carrying a weight that had not been there before. You were given a choice. The Emperor's gaze hardened, not in defiance, but in recognition. And now, he asked. Ariana looked at him, and for the first time since the system had fully activated, there was no tension in her expression, no urgency, no edge of warning. Only certainty. Now it decides, she said. As if in response, the system shifted again. A new layer of data unfolded across the displays, not tactical, not strategic, but evidentiary. Records. Every command issued under Directive Black. Every attempt to escalate. Every authorization that had placed civilian lives at risk. Not hidden. Not archived. Broadcast. Across the Empire. The truth, in its entirety, delivered without distortion, without interpretation, without the filters that power had always applied. The Emperor watched it happen, the weight of his decisions unfolding before billions of eyes, his authority dissolving not through force, but through exposure. This is your answer? He asked quietly. Public humiliation? Ariana met his gaze. No, she said. Accountability. The word carried further than any weapon could have. Outside the chamber, the network completed its restructuring. Military systems remained functional, but their priorities had changed. No longer instruments of expansion or suppression, they responded only to defensive parameters, to threats that aligned with the system's core directive. Protection. Not domination. The Empire still existed. But it was no longer what it had been. The Emperor stood in the center of it, the last figure of an authority that had just been redefined by something he could neither command nor resist. You could have destroyed us, he said finally. Logan's gaze did not waver. We still can, he replied. The pause. Then, softer, we won't. The choice settled into the chamber with more weight than any act of violence could have carried. Ariana's grip on his hand tightened slightly, not out of fear, but out of something quieter, something that had held through everything. We're done here, she said. The system acknowledged. Not with words. With action. The chamber doors opened again, not as a breach, not as an override, but as a path. Unobstructed. For them. No one moved to stop them. No one could. As they walked forward, the Empire parted around them, not physically, but structurally, systems adjusting, pathways clearing, authority stepping aside in the face of something it had never been designed to confront. At the threshold, Ariana paused. Not for the Emperor. Not for the chamber. For a single moment, she looked back, not with anger, not with triumph, but with the quiet recognition of what had been and what had changed. The next time, she said, her voice carrying easily through the silent chamber, don't mistake patience for weakness. Then she turned and they left. The doors closed behind them with a finality that felt less like an ending and more like a boundary being drawn. Across the galaxy, the network settled into its new state, its presence no longer hidden, no longer dormant, but active in a way that did not demand attention and could not be ignored. Every system, every world, every decision, now existed within its awareness. And at the center of it all, a single directive remained, unaltered, unchallengeable, absolute. Protect what humans choose. In orbit, Logan's ship broke its silent hold at the outer marker, moving toward the station with a smooth, controlled approach that matched the precision of everything that had come before. The docking sequence initiated without request. The system already knew. Inside the shuttle bay, the airlock opened as they approached, the path ahead clear, the way home unobstructed. Ariana stepped inside first, Logan following without hesitation, his presence steady once more, the fracture gone as though it had never existed. For a moment, as the hatch sealed behind them, the galaxy held its breath. Then the ship departed. No escort. No interference. Just a single vessel moving through space, untouched, unchallenged, carrying with it the quiet certainty of something the Empire, and now the galaxy, would never forget. They had not witnessed a war. They had witnessed a boundary. And somewhere, deep within every system that had watched, recorded, and learned, a final message settled into place. Not as a warning, as truth. You can build empires on power, but humanity builds something else entirely. And once it wakes, it does not forget.